So in this final hour of the show, we are going to talk about Just Stop Oil. And the reason we're talking about the campaign group is because 3 years after it originally came into the public consciousness and more than 3,000 arrests later, they have announced that they are winding down with a final protest next month. Now, the official line from the group, which is that it's achieved its goals. Labour is going to introduce a policy to ban new oil and gas licenses. However, there is also speculation that this is just that the campaign group has been policed into non-existence, essentially. So you have Roger Hallam, the co-founder. He's serving a 4-year prison sentence. And you've also got key strategic figures like Louise Lancaster, a former teacher, and Lark Maxey, who is a researcher, who are also in prison as we speak. And it makes me therefore wonder two things. First of all, in terms of the awareness that was raised, how we feel about the urgency of climate change and the necessity to stop new oil licenses in particular, what do you think the legacy of Just Stop Oil will be? 03456060973 is the number to call. And then the second question that I want to ask is, how worried are you at the fact that this law that changed the way that protests were policed and essentially gave police officers much greater powers to determine what was a disturbance and to arrest people if they were just being a bit annoying, essentially. How concerned are you about that? You know, what would you do if you needed to protest about something that you really cared about in 2025? Would you feel safe to protest? 03456060973. Now, just a reminder of some of the highlights, I don't know if that's the right word to use, of the activity of Just Stop Oil. There was, of course, the incident in 2022 when Just Stop Oil protesters threw tomato soup at Vincent van Gogh's sunflower painting in the National Gallery. Then in June 2023, there was the disruption at the first day of the Ashes Test cricket match between England and Australia, and a protester could be seen running towards the wicket and spilling orange powder across the grass before they were tackled by members of the England team. There was also in July 2023 protesters storming the courts at Wimbledon before throwing jigsaw pieces and confetti to the ground. In the same summer, campaigners disrupted the London Pride March and sat in front of the Coca-Cola float before spraying pink and black paint over the road. Then there was in November 2023 when activists managed to get on stage during a performance of Les Miserables at a theatre on Shaftesbury Avenue. There was the throwing paint powder over Stonehenge, which happened in June 2024 last year. And then in January of this year, Charles Darwin's grave was daubed with this now signature orange paint. That's a few of the things that have been done. And I look at that and I think no one died. You know, they gained a lot of publicity. And I know you're going to talk to me about gluing yourself to roads and holding up people who needed to get to hospital, etc., etc. But, you know, that happened. First of all, that the policy is to let ambulances through. And second of all, that happens when there are football matches. That happens when there are festivals. That happens when a monarch dies or on bank holidays. That ambulance and people who need to get to hospital appointments not being able to get where they're supposed to go happens every single day. And people only ever seem to get cross about it when it's a protester that is the cause of those hold-ups. That aside, I'm looking at this activity and going, no permanent damage was done. No one died. And yet 3 people are in prison and there have been 3,000 arrests. Does that worry you? Because I'll be honest, it worries me. 03456060973 is the number to call. You can also text me on 84850 or send a comment to LBC via your Alexa. Well, we're joined now by Jonathan Porritt, who is a climate campaigner, author and co-founder of Forum for the Future, and also Pia Bastide, who is a Just Stop Oil spokesperson. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us this evening. I'll come to you first, Pia. Let me ask you, how would you like Just Stop Oil to be remembered? What would you like your legacy to be?
I I would love it if Just Stop Oil was remembered for affecting policy and affecting change, which is exactly what we did. Our original demand of no new oil and gas was met and was part of Labour's manifesto to be elected. So I'd be grateful if Just Stop Oil was remembered for being a successful civil resistance group.
Do you think that Labour including that in a manifesto is a direct result of your protesting activities?
Oh, absolutely. And it wasn't just Labour. It was every major political party, aside from the Conservatives, that adopted our demand ahead of the general election. Yes.
And thank you so much. And Jonathan, you're listening to that. Do you, and I know that I've read some of what you've said about this, do you think that it's just as likely that Just Stop Oil have been policed to a point where continuing to protest is no longer feasible for them?
I entirely agree with Pia that had a huge impact primarily on the Labour Party in opposition and then on Labour in government. And it was the biggest single factor that influenced their change of policy in that regard. If I look at the decision taken recently by Just Stop Oil, there's no point denying that the introduction of new, very oppressive legislation about the right to protest in 2 new acts in 2022 and 2023 has had a big deterrent effect on Just Stop Oil. That's, I don't think, in doubt. I deeply, deeply regret that, because I think that what Just Stop Oil has done over the last 3 years is to remind people just how urgent this situation is and why we've all got to up our game.
Do you think that we're now at a point where all environmental protests has become unfeasible because of the new laws that have been brought in? I'll ask that to you both. I'll come to Jonathan first.
I think that's a really important question, and I actually am astonished that mainstream environmental organisations, all the way through from the National Trust and RSPB to Friends of the Earth and the others, are not more anxious about the degree to which the previous Conservative government and now Labour, who've confirmed those new acts, oppressive acts, the degree to which we have become something very similar to a police state. We've lost the right to protest in many respects. In the way in which the judicial system responds now to this, we've lost the freedom of speech in our courts. Defendants are no longer allowed to talk about their motivation and why they did what they did. They're not allowed to do what has historically been taken for granted, which is to appeal to jurors in any case to explain that the actions they took were entirely proportionate to their concern and fear about the future bearing down on us. I am really worried about that. And frankly, it's not just Stop Oil that has been hit by this. It's every single environmental organisation in the country.
And Pia, same question. If Just Stop Oil was beginning now in 2025, would you have more concerns about joining in protest activity than you did 3 years ago?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's worth pointing out that those draconian anti-protest laws were drafted by climate denial think tanks, such as the Policy Exchange, which is funded by ExxonMobil, a fossil fuel company. So I think that's, it's a clear sign, though, of Just Stop Oil's success that this government is so scared of ordinary people demanding change and telling the truth about what's really happening about climate collapse, that it would rather lock up students, grandmothers and doctors rather than billionaires and the execs behind so many scandals like the PPE scandal during COVID, post office scandal, the crap in our rivers scandal. It's a clear sign this government is scared of environmental protesters because we are telling the truth.
It's interesting. As we've been talking, there have been texts that have been coming into the studio, and people are clearly angry at some of the tactics that were employed by Just Stop Oil during their protesting activities. And I wonder what it is psychologically that would make somebody more angry with you than they are with the billionaires and the companies that you have just mentioned that are literally destroying the prospect of Earth and life on Earth being a feasible thing. I mean, you being involved in these activities, you must have seen a lot of this. Do you get it?
I completely get it. You know, I work in a cafe, and I support Just Stop Oil in my spare time, and I feel that I'm an ordinary person, right? And I completely understand people's frustration when they're trying to get to work or trying to get somewhere, and there's a roadblock or there's a slow march. I think the reason behind that is those billionaires that we're talking about put ordinary people in such a crisis. When you've got 21% of the UK population that's living in poverty, 4 million kids going to bed hungry at night in the sixth richest nation in the world, this is because of those billionaires. So you now have ordinary people struggling to put food on the table, to find a job that pays a livable wage, to spend time with their family. And yeah, the easy target is to get angry at the people getting in the way of them living their lives. So yeah, I completely understand. I just feel that it's a misplaced anger. Yeah.
That's a really interesting way of looking at it, that it's all symptomatic of the same thing, actually, that we have, you know, like 5 people hoarding all the wealth, and it's making us all angry with each other. Jonathan, do you think, you know, in terms of these draconian measures that have been brought into police protests, will they continue to be disproportionately used in relation to environmental protests, or do you think that all protesters or all people who might be minded to protest should be very concerned?
I think we'll see the test of that, Natasha, over the next year or so, next couple of years. I mean, don't forget that many of those involved, for instance, in Palestine Action and in different campaigns to point out time after time to politicians and the media that we're witnessing a real-time genocide going on in Gaza, they've been subject to exactly the same draconian repression. And I don't doubt that the government will use it whenever they can. And I just want to say, I mean, I spent the last year, Natasha, working with 26 young Just Stop Oil activists, all the different actions that you mentioned in your preamble have been part of this project. And I've been working with them and interviewing them and spending time with them and trying to understand what it is that drives them on. And Pia's absolutely right. There is this sense of amusement of just, Frank, I'm not able to believe why it is that politicians won't seize the reality of this emergency, won't get on and do it. And that's all about the gap between what the science tells us and what the politics responds to that science. And we're so far off the pace that even if Just Stop Oil has decided to hang up its high vis, I think was the line that they used in their press release, I'm afraid that there will be a need for very honest, very uncompromising civil disobedience to force our politicians to do what they morally, politically, and financially need to do. And that hasn't gone away just because Just Stop Oil has temporarily put its campaigning, maybe permanently, but has put its campaigning on hold. It won't go away. The need is still there. The demand is still there. The moral imperative is still there. This climate crisis threatens to engulf hundreds of millions of people in the course of the next few decades, and we have to respond at that level.
I mean, the crisis that is happening right now in Myanmar, there's an earthquake, and we know that natural disasters of that nature and freak weather conditions are becoming more frequent as a result of climate change, and that has implications for the entire world ultimately. Why do you think that there is that disconnect? And I'll come to you, Pia, on this. Do you think that you have seen throughout the past 3 years people starting to join those dots more, or do you see this kind of sticking your head in the sand type mentality, which a lot of people seem to have?
I think more and more people are starting to feel the effects of the global crisis, the climate crisis in the UK. We've seen it getting closer. In Valencia, for example, with the deadly floods a few months ago. We've seen it in LA, which is, a big city in the West. It's not just happening in the global South. We've seen it here, I think last year with wildfires in Scotland. We've seen it with those horrendous storms that have killed. Storm Bert, I think, killed 2 or 3 people. So we are seeing it here, the floods in Yorkshire. We are seeing it here. And I feel that people are realising the urgency of what we're facing. And Just Stop Oil managed to bring the conversation around the climate crisis in everyday conversation, as well as in politics, in decision making.
As we have been talking, this text has come in from Gina. She says, we're unable to tax the rich as much as we agree with Just Stop Oil's vision, we can't do anything about that. This is what Gina thinks. Then she says, to Just Stop Oil, change tactics, talk to the government and the influencers, and I'm sure the nation will back the moral route. So I guess the question I want to ask you is, do you think that every party, apart from the Conservatives, would have put no more oil licences in their manifestos if you hadn't have had protest disruptively?
I don't think so. No. It wasn't spoken about in the extent that it should have been before Just Stop Oil came on the scene. We brought it at the top of media conversation, and it's thanks to media outlets like yours, for example, that we were able to really redirect the focus on the climate crisis and get all political parties to realise that 2/3 of the British public wanted to see more action when it comes to the climate crisis.
Thank you so much to both of you for your time this evening. Really appreciate it. That was Jonathan Porritt, who is a climate campaigner, author and co-founder of Forum for the Future, and Pia Bastide, who is a Just Stop Oil spokesperson. The question I want to ask you is, what do you think the legacy of Just Stop Oil will be? And also, we know that the new rules around protest, the new laws around protest were brought in pretty much as a direct result of Just Stop Oil's activity to try and stop climate protesters from being annoying, essentially. And I'm really worried about that. And I think you should be too. So my question is, are you? And the question I'm asking you is, what legacy did Just Stop Oil leave behind? One of the aspects of their legacy are these new laws around protests, which are much more draconian, give the police far greater powers. And what will you do if there is something that you really want or need to protest about? Has it made you less likely to protest about the things that you care about? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. Sue has called from Lancaster. What would you like to say?
Hi, Natasha. I share your concerns. Initially, I was really scared about the climate and what was happening. I've got a teenage daughter, and she asked that we go down to London to do one of the big one marches and to go down to the Restore Nature marches. And I saw sort of 50, 70, 80,000 people on the streets and was horrified when I came back to see it wasn't even in the news. You know, MPs weren't talking about it. Nobody was talking about anything in Parliament. Anything that was asked nicely and flexibly talked to influencers and to the government was just ignored. And it really got me interested in watching Just Stop Oil, and particularly when I saw the soup thrower, Phoebe Plummer, I think it is, who threw the soup at Van Gogh, and listened to the eloquence of her argument and thought, why is it that nothing's happening here? And then to see the way that protest laws have been brought in to just like silence and to stamp it out. And it wasn't until I looked into how the funding of politicians was happening that I started to join the dots myself and see that, you know, these oil companies practically pay these MPs to just to keep them going, you know. It horrified me really to join those dots.
It was as far back as the 1950s that oil companies started denying the effects of climate change. I think I'm right in saying, and I could be misremembering this, but I think I'm right in saying that they initially funded the research into climate change, thinking that their activities would have no bearing on it. But then the climate scientists found that it was, and that it was really quite worrying. And rather than pivoting and saying, OK, we'll have to change our business model, we'll have to find another way of supplying energy, they then put all of their resources into funding propaganda around climate change denial. And as you say, that has its tentacles in absolutely everything. And I also think you're absolutely right to say, when people say, why didn't you write to your local MP? Why didn't you sign a petition? It makes me go, do you think they didn't? Do you think they didn't do that?
Absolutely.
You know, and that you get to a point where you kind of have to chuck some soup over a painting because it's the only way to make anyone listen.
Yeah. I mean, I remember talking to my local MP here before the last general election, and I spoke to her about Rosebank, one of these new giant oil fields. And I said, it's owned by Equinor. It's 80% owned by Equinor, which is owned by Norway. And we're going to give them billions and billions of pounds in subsidy. And then if it's not even going to make things cheaper for us because they then own the oil, and this isn't even our country. And she knew nothing about it. She understood nothing. And then I've sort of followed her through since she's been elected. And she's taken donations from Israeli-backed people. And I'm thinking, what on earth is happening with our politicians here that they, one, don't know what's happening with the environment, and two, accept payments from things that don't make them independent, aren't in our best interest as ordinary people. And it's almost as though they're just paid representatives of the billionaires these days.
Sue, thank you so much for your call. And, similar questions being asked by some of the money that Wes Streeting has taken from private healthcare firms, for example. And I'm not suggesting for one moment that influences what he thinks should be done with the NHS. But it does make people ask questions. Maybe the conversation we ought to be having is, how should MPs be funded? And should it be allowed for lobby groups with an enormous amount of funds at their disposal to be able to... I mean, they're giving those MPs money for a reason, is all I'm saying. They wouldn't do it if they didn't think that there was going to be something that they were going to be getting out of that transaction. And Sue has pulled at some of those threads. And maybe that is what Just Stop Oil made us all do. Just pull at the threads and see where it led us. Gary has called from Wolverhampton. What would you like to say?
Wow.
Oh, Gary, it's a terrible line. I'm going to see if we can get you back on a better line because I do want to hear what you have to say. In the meantime, I'll just remind you of the question that I'm asking you is Just Stop Oil is having its final protest next month. And I just want you to reflect on how they have influenced the way that you think about the issues, but also how the phenomenon that was Just Stop Oil has changed the laws around protesting and how keen would you be to go on a protest in 2025? Jill has called from Stroud. What would you like to say?
Hi, it's interesting following on from, I think this is really good coverage, thank you, because it's really refreshing to have sensible conversation about Just Stop Oil and about the climate crisis.
You're welcome.
And you were just saying about the money in politics and the corruption, and I think the door of power is wide open to these corporations and to the money. And, if we see the access that Elon Musk has to the White House, we shouldn't think it's not the same here. And what Just Stop Oil are trying to do on behalf of as ordinary people is to knock on that door and try and get the voice and access to the people who, it shouldn't be about power, it should be about responsibility. And, they should be working for us, not having power over us, and we're not even allowed to say what we want. And can I draw your attention to Brian Eno today, after a horrible arrest of some of the people I suspect that Jonathan Porritt has been working with, the young people, were meeting in a Quaker meeting house. Oh, yeah, I heard about this. To discuss what they could do about the climate crisis and Palestine. They were discussing things, what they might do. A peaceful meeting. And they were raided and arrested. I think 20 young people were arrested, 30 police went in.
And that's unprecedented for a Quaker meeting house to be targeted in that way.
That's right. It's never been a Quaker meeting house. Quakers are known for their peaceful, they're anti-war. And what Brian Eno wrote was that he said, when the greatest threats to our future go unchallenged by those in power, and when the state treats moral concern as criminal intent, we all should pay attention. And then he condemns those who look away. And I think the big discussion of, what should Just Stop Oil do? I'm a member, I've taken action with Just Stop Oil. People often say, well, why don't you do this? And I think, why isn't everyone doing something? Why aren't we all acting? And
what's your answer to that question?
I think there are a couple of problems. One is increasing. My daughter mentioned wanting to go on a protest, but she'd be terrified now and doesn't want me to go on anymore. And obviously, I've been arrested myself, so I'm having to think twice. And secondly, I think we've talked about the power of these corporates over our politics and over our judiciary, but I think they're influencing our media and the media discourse that people are listening to. Things like GB News and some of the newspapers. They're hearing poison, they're hearing divisive language, and they're hearing lies about us. And in the same way that people's anger about, like Pia earlier said, people are having a hard time now. So they'll be told that the immigrants are a problem. They're also told that we're the problem. And it's anything but whatever you do, don't look up the line and look where the problem really lies. It's people who are pocketing the profits and exploiting people, ordinary people, and our planet, and nature and every living thing, and they don't care.
And do you know what, Jill, as you've been talking, we've received a message from Iris who has said vandalism is never the answer. Why in God's name do they think ruining the man in the street's life will affect the country? Just Stop Oil never ruined the man in the street's life. And for me, part of the point that they were making by focusing on things like Van Gogh's sunflowers and Charles Darwin's grave is to say, why are we prizing these objects higher than human life? And it kind of reminds me of Donald Trump saying that if you attack a Tesla, you will be considered a domestic terrorist. Teslas have more rights now than women in the United States. And in the same way, people get far more concerned about the stones at Stonehenge than they do the real human breathing people that are dying as a result of the stoppable impacts of climate change. And I see it happening, but it makes absolutely no sense to me. I mean, does it to you on any level?
No, I feel for Iris because we hear that all the time. And she's heard the media discourse that says that we've destroyed things. We've destroyed nothing, as you say. And, my criminal record is for walking slowly down Whitehall to try to get to Downing Street with 24 other mothers and grandmothers. It's less than half a mile, and we were stopped. And we've got, some of us were convicted, some not, but we were arrested. We spent the night in cells. Is that the country we want to live in? And do you remember the Manic Street Preacher song?
If you tolerate this, and your children will be next.
And that goes through my head. I've got two daughters, 20 and 22. I don't want the world to be like this that they're growing into. You do everything you can to bring up the children, and it's your instinct to fight danger for them. And the danger that's ahead, which every parent, everyone should be really, really worried right now and really thinking, what can we do? And that's what we in Just Stop Oil are thinking. Okay, this is really bad. What can we do?
That's a really interesting question, Jill, and it's one that I'm going to throw out actually to anybody who is listening. What do you want to see Just Stop Oil do next? David has called from Prestatyn. What would you like to say?
Well, I'd like to say well done, Stop Oil, because they managed to raise awareness among young people, and that's a good thing. But in the fight to stop climate change, every little step counts, right? And I think they should go global.
Okay.
So while they're serving the sentence, communicate, they have the media coverage now. So they should go global because at the end of the day, the issue is a global one, right?
Yes.
Take Russia, for example. Most of their revenues come from oil. What are they going to do if we stop oil, literally?
Yes,
That's a big question, and I think it was too big a question for that little movement, but it had to start somewhere, and now they need to take it further. There are plenty of groups, fighting climate change. Greta Thunberg was brilliant. I think she's a saint, personally. I think Extinction Rebellion is another group. They should coalesce. They should come together and make something. And
I mean,
push that issue globally.
It's pretty impossible to protest in Russia. We're talking about an administration that kills political dissidents, political opponents.
No, this is not about protest. This is about convincing politics about the need to find a solution globally to our dependence,
which is
on
what COP is meant to do, isn't it? COP is ostensibly
debate
for that very reason.
There are avenues now. civil disobedience is one thing, but obviously people can't leave their jobs and go out on the streets and block traffic. I mean, it's not a practical solution. Yes, there are avenues open now, but there needs to be a larger debate.
So what avenues do you think are open now that weren't open 3 years ago in terms of debate?
The legal avenues, for example, they are now basically martyrs, aren't they? They are victims of the legal system.
Yes, yeah, which is why I'm curious as to why you're saying that avenues are open now and we're able to have the debate in a way that we weren't 3 years ago.
Well, I'm saying avenues are open because young people were quite impressed by their actions. I mean, It's typical of young people to be rebellious for a start. So
but what do you think those young people should be doing?
With their profile, they raised awareness.
Right.
And maybe that will translate into bigger actions.
Okay, David, thank you for your call. I mean, there are so many people online that are bellowing about this issue all day long, and that's all they do. And I know that because my algorithm knows that I want to hear about climate and environmental issues, so it shows me those people. I think if I had a different algorithm, if I had different interests, then I possibly wouldn't be aware of their existence. And this is what this keep coming back to this thing of why did they have to be disruptive? It's like saying, why does Ed Davey have to go down a water slide? It's because in a world where Farage is saying ridiculous things all day long just to keep the spotlight on him, or Trump, or any of these ridiculous populists who just talk nonsense because they know that they'll be followed by microphones no matter where they go and distract from the real issues which are facing humanity. You have to glue yourself to a road. You have to chuck some soup on a painting. You have to use some orange paint. You have to take your top off and go down a water slide. It's the only way to make people pay attention. Adrian has called from Perth. What would you like to say?
Oh, hi, Natasha. Thanks so much for having me on. Yes, three things about the legacy of Just Stop Oil. I think the first thing is that Just Stop Oil has kept climate collapse and the fossil fuels role in that collapse on the front pages. Secondly, is kept 4.4 billion barrels of oil under the North Sea. But thirdly, and I think this is possibly the most important achievement of Just Stop Oil, is that it has forced the state, by which I mean like the government, the police, the judiciary, the system, if you like, to really show its hand and to really kind of expose itself to what it really is. And so that we now can see, the magnitude of the problem that faces all of us as ordinary people. It's huge. And so we need to come together to face up to this.
So I agree with you that the magnitude of the problem is enormous, and I think that that's maybe what prevents a lot of people from doing anything about it, because they think, I'm just one ordinary person, I'm not a billionaire, I don't have lots of money or resources at my disposal, what can I possibly do? What would be your response to that question?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think my response would be stop being just one person. Join with others. And here's an invite to people who are looking for the next step that you're asking about. The 26th of April, okay, so that's a totally inclusive action by Just Stop Oil in Parliament Square, London. Please come along. Or if you can't make it down to that event, find out. And look to Just Stop Oil as well, because exciting things that I don't fully know myself, but exciting things are going to come from that organisation very, very soon, and we're going to be hearing about it pretty soon, I would imagine. Adrian,
thank you for your call. I should say, you did mention at the beginning of your call, but Adrian is a spokesperson for Just Stop Oil, and therefore you heard a little bit of not a party political broadcast, but a campaigning broadcast on behalf of them. But it does make you wonder, doesn't it, when we have these incredibly draconian protest laws, even if you are in a group of people, in a world where you can be arrested for walking too slowly down the road, where, a police officer gets to decide whether or not the disruption that you are causing is disruptive enough for them to arrest you. Are you less inclined to protest about anything anything that you care about than you would have been 3 years ago is a question that I'm interested in exploring. Hayley has called from Nottingham. What would you like to say?
Hi there, thanks for having me on. I'd like to say that I think I'd echo what Adrian before me has said, that there's great power in not just being a single person, and we need to come together. We need to start challenging the misinformation that's all around us, look to everyone around us with the empathy you feel for the people you love most, and actually there's enormous power in that, people together to challenge the system that we're in. But what I'd really like to say is, what do you think you can do next in the fight for Just Stop Oil? Yes, where we've got a media that is so bent on disinformation. We need to challenge that. We need to challenge the lies that people like Farage are the answer to social change. We need to help people join the dots between a billionaire-owned system and them not having enough food on the table, them not having good health care, and them not having a government that tackles the climate crisis and doing the things that need to secure us a safe future. So what do you think you can do next?
Well, it's an interesting question that you ask. I think it's important for me. I mean, this is a little show, Hayley, compared to some of the Goliaths that are out there in the media. But I do, in this little corner of the media, I do try and have conversations that aren't being had elsewhere, and I do try not to be drawn in anymore to the culture wars stuff. Me personally, that is kind of my resolution, is that there's still really annoying attempts to draw us into culture war conversations about things that don't really matter compared to climate change, and I am trying to be less drawn in by them.
Wonderful, and I'm really appreciative of your show this evening. I think whatever Just Stop Oil do next, we'll start to join the dots, we'll tell people the truth, and we are going to fight for what is better and what is good for ordinary people and what is going to give us a secure future.
Hayley, thank you so much for your call. It's so interesting, isn't it? So, people keep saying this is about ordinary people, and it is. It's about you. It's about your family, your life, and it's about, whether or not you believe in man-made climate change, rest assured that your insurance company do. And it's whether or not you would be able to get insurance if your house was flooded. And, it is about small boat crossings as well. The thing that apparently everybody is so bothered about in this country, that we're seeing more and more people having to flee their homes because they can't live there, because life is not sustainable where they are because of climate change. We're going to see more mass migration because of this issue. This does affect you, and it does affect your family, ordinary people. And yet there is this perception, isn't there, that anybody who cares about climate change is, metropolitan liberal elite. I've written a piece, which you will see tomorrow, I believe. It's being published for one of the newspapers, about how annoying it is that because I'm well-spoken, people don't believe that I'm working class. But I reassure you, I am very much from a working class person, a working class background. I'm an ordinary person, and my only motivation is wanting life to be better for everyone and trying to eradicate injustice when I see it. I'm not sponsored by anyone. My opinions aren't born out of wanting more power or the promise of more power. I don't hang out with oligarchs and billionaires and leaders of countries. I'm just a person, a working class person. But because I went to university and I'm quite well educated and I speak quite nicely, people say I'm metropolitan and liberal elite and I'm out of touch. And I see that as an accusation that is levelled at protesters all the time when they're more normal. It's normal to be really concerned about this issue and to be terrified for the future of the human race. Actually, we should all be gluing ourselves to roads if we were normal. But we live in a sociopathic society which says just get up and get through your day, go to work, make some money, forget about everything, go to sleep, wake up in the next morning and repeat. And that's less normal. And that's the unacknowledged thing, I think, a lot of the time in these conversations. Anyway, thank you for listening to my slightly unexpected TED Talk. I didn't expect to go down that route. If you want to contribute to this conversation about what the legacy of Just Stop Oil will be, Frida has called from Coventry. What would you like to say?
Hello, Natasha. First of all, congratulations on hitting this topic. There was a gentleman earlier who talked about groups, including Just Stop Oil, getting together globally, possibly. And I just wanted to feed in the fact that we all have short-term memory. And I don't know if you would remember the poll tax riots with Margaret Thatcher.
Well, no, but my dad talks about them a lot, so I'm aware of them, yeah.
Right, yeah, the thing was, I think, again, that was that one time, power really did rest with the people, and we forget that we do have the power, if we actually act together and just say no. Because at the end of the day, what annoys me, possibly your father, is the fact that politicians are being paid by us and their expenses, and they have a better standard of living than so many people in this country. And yet, what are they doing? They're helping all the big boys and ignoring the people that pay them. It's just morally wrong, apart from, the fact that you could start putting the word democracy in inverted commas. It's farcical.
Well, I also think people forget as well that if you take the suffragettes, for example, who are now broadly considered to be heroines, who brought about much needed change, and history remembers them very fondly indeed. If you look at what was written about the suffragettes at the time, they were described by the newspapers in very similar terms to the way that climate change protesters are described now. And they were smashing windows and chaining themselves to things and creating a nuisance as well. Absolutely. And it's, why is it only in retrospect that we can ever have been against or for the things that we so clearly should have been?
It's about control. Power again, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess so.
But please, I don't know who's listening, but just remember Margaret Thatcher and the quick turnaround once the people of all ages and all classes, if you like, stood up and said no. That's what it needs.
Yeah, Frida, thank you so much for your call. And we do forget, don't we? And also if we join together as well, if we sort of overlook these relatively superficial and petty differences that divide us and go, look, we're all being affected by this massive issue. We should join together to fight it. I always think of, there was an instance where the Welsh miners and then LGBTQ people from predominantly London joined forces to protest the Conservative government. And those are two groups of people that on the surface of it don't have much in common, but they had a common enemy. And so they, put any differences to one side. And that was an incredibly powerful thing. And we need more of that, I think. Graham has called from Manchester. What would you like to say?
Hi, Natasha. Can I just say first how grateful I am for this programme? But you were talking a few minutes ago about flooding and affecting ordinary people. And I just wanted to tell you just a quick story. I mean, just a few weeks ago in Manchester, we had catastrophic flooding, and some friends of mine who are definitely ordinary people, she used to work in a shop, and they haven't got a lot of money, and they've lived in a house for 30 years, and their house flooded. And they rang the insurance company sorted it all out, and they said, well, their insurance was £400 a year, and the insurance company put their insurance up to £1,800 a year. And that's the reality of the climate crisis. That's what's really happening. It's affecting ordinary people all the time, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse. Yeah. And we simply are not addressing this massive problem seriously enough. And this is the responsibility of our government. They need to talk to the people. They need to tell us how serious it is, because until they do, we're not going to see people really recognising that we have to make changes.
And you've brought us full circle, really, because right at the beginning of the show, I was asking, why aren't the government acknowledging the damage that's been done to the economy by Brexit? I suspect there's a similar answer as to why the government isn't talking more about climate change. And it's because it's just so politically unpopular, because the right-wing media would hang them out to dry. And the fear would be they wouldn't win the next election.
I think there comes a point where you have to tell the truth. And I think if they tell the truth, they're more likely to get the response they want than not to. Most people want action on climate. And the reality is that just ignoring it is much more expensive than dealing with it. So what they call adaptation is more expensive than mitigation. Mitigation is doing something about it. And that's the reality. So when we talk about the cost of the climate crisis, the cost of net zero, when we talk about that, what we have to remember is, what's that cost relative to? Well, it's relative to not doing anything. And not doing anything is much more expensive. So we have to take this more seriously. We have to start, in the technical jargon, mitigating this problem. If we don't, we're going to fail.
Graham, thank you so much for your call. While you've been speaking, Caroline has texted in and said, I'm all for protesting peacefully. Draw the line at violence or destroying beautiful works of art. And I do have to emphasise that no works of art were destroyed by Just Stop Oil. When they threw oil at the painting, there was a protective guard in front of the painting. The painting remained utterly unharmed. But people do express so much concern for paintings, for works of art. And I understand why. But what I'm less inclined to understand is why we can't have that same amount of concern and empathy, at least, for people, for human beings, how they've become less important than a painting or a stone or a pool table or a Tesla, if we're going to talk about the US. It's a bit of a mystery to me. Ben has called from Edinburgh. What would you like to say?
Hello, good evening. Forgive me, sometimes I have a speech impediment, so do forgive me. It's nice to speak to you eventually. I would say it's now time that all the groups are against climate change and want to see the world not end need to now understand that that it's failed, the conventional methods. Think outside the box. Like, for example, Bansky is an amazing example, what he does. But you can never get a positive with a negative following, no violence. You can't do that. You're all just part of the problem. So, for example, one of my sayings is, we all know that money makes the world go round. It's not love makes the world go round. Money makes the world go round. But get filthy rich and turn your excess money into love. Think outside the box. Start thinking about, for example, in the 60s, the passive hippie was crushed. Be inventive, like Bansky. What we could do with another, maybe a live aid for this time for Earth.
Oh, but you know what the papers would do with that. They would look at all of the methods of transport that the musicians involved had travelled to that event via.
I took Piers Morgan on about that one years ago, right? Is this, okay? If the alternative methods were there, we'd use them. So we're all hypocrites. They're not there. Even the electric car, very head in the sand. Where's the energy come from?
Well, Ben, you make a good point. This idea that you have to not be complicit in order to call out injustice. We are all complicit in most injustices to a degree. Depending on where you buy your groceries and how you get to work and, whether you've ever been on holiday. All of that kind of ridiculous stuff that people throw up, that you can't not participate in society, but that shouldn't mean that you're not allowed to criticise society either. So many positive messages coming in about the hour of conversation that we've just had. I am reading them, so thank you so much for all of them. I very much appreciate them. That's all from me for another week. I will be back with you next Saturday from 6. If you missed any of tonight's show, you can listen back on